Hello, this is Anthony.
Okay, Anthony, thanks for joining us. We're just about to get started.
Okay.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Dragon. I'm with the Office of Economic Opportunity. Welcome to our Shining a Light on Poverty discussion series. This is the 8th in a year-long series of discussions that explore the many facets, challenges, and causes of poverty. Just a reminder, hopefully you can all join us next month, October 30th at noon, when we will be discussing women in poverty issues with Carrie Brown, the Executive Director of the Vermont Commission on Women. For those joining us on the webinar today, following Anthony's presentation, there'll be time for questions and discussion. As always, you can ask a question at any time by typing your question into the chat box on your screen. Today our speaker is Anthony Poore from the Federal Reserve, and we will be discussing children's savings accounts. For those interested in learning more about children's savings accounts, and how they can mitigate poverty, you can attend the forum sponsored by the Child Poverty Council and the Office of Economic Opportunity on October 27th from 9 to noon. If you are interested in attending that forum, you can contact me at paul.dragon@state.vt.us. So Anthony Poore joined the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston in 2010. Prior to that, Anthony was the Assistant Dean of Southern New Hampshire University School of Community Economic Development. Currently, Anthony serves on the board of directors of several agencies, including NeighborWorks, Southern New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, and the Manchester Community College Advisory Board, and we are just delighted to have him here today to talk about children's savings accounts. Anthony, and you'll just need to log in as the presenter to start the presentation.
All right,
you're all set to go, my friend. Take it away.
Yes, sir, I appreciate it. And thank you for allowing me to take this opportunity to share with you some of our work of late as it relates to universal and automatic children's savings accounts. I really appreciate it. What I'd like to do today during today's webinar is really highlight maybe 5 specific areas. One is I'd like to take a moment to define what CSA models are and what they are not and their various components. 2, I'd like to describe or share why the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston is interested in universal and automatic children's savings accounts as a long-term poverty alleviation tool. I'd like to share with you some of the relevant CSA-related research, talk a little bit about what's going on at the national and regional level, and then talk a little bit about the activities of the New England Children's Savings Account Consortium, which is a member-based affinity group of state agencies and actors working together to advance this concept of universal children's savings accounts. So I'll start with what children's savings accounts are and their definitions. So you'll hear this term called children's savings accounts sometimes used interchangeably with this concept called children's development accounts. But what I'd like to do is differentiate them, and I'd like to differentiate them in the why component. So if you're interested in access and affordability issues as it relates to education, then many people will call these children's savings accounts. But if you're looking at a multi-generational model that looks at how we can affect positive behavior change through providing some sort of match component or some sort of even benchmark incentives tied towards, say, for example, financial capabilities training for the parents, then you're going to call that a children's development account. But my point is you'll hear these terms often used interchangeably. But think about the how, or the why they're doing a particular program and what their end result is. So children's savings accounts have been on the books and have been talked about with Michael Sheridan since in the early 1990s. And they really are long-term asset-building accounts that are established for children as early as birth and allowed to grow over time. We know that. But even one of the other areas that I find there is some confusion is when you think about long-term asset-building accounts, sometimes people confuse these with other max savings programs called IDAs. And I think it's important that I differentiate what an individual development account is from a CSA. And it's pretty easy. You know, when you look at IDAs versus CSAs, IDAs don't quite have the scale that children's savings accounts have. When you think about their sources of funds, when you have federal sources of capital, AFI funds supporting IDA projects, you're limited in terms of who can participate in these match savings programs by income eligibility. So, for example, if you think about where I reside in New Hampshire as an example, a family of four making $47,000, I believe it is, $100, would not be able to participate in our match savings program provided through the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. What about those people who make $48,000? Don't they have an opportunity to benefit from a match savings program? In this aspect, they would not. Now, CSAs have scale. They have variable sources of income in terms of, you'll see philanthropic organizations supporting these. You'll see states using general funds. You'll see private institutions being a part of this. So their sources of capital are different, and their uses are very different. With IDAs, you can use them for the purchase of your first-time home, which is the typical use, or to seed a small business or to fund education. The sole purpose of children's savings accounts is to advance one person's academic opportunity through college access and affordability. So when you think about CSAs, there are primarily two different models that are out here. There's one which is a deposit-only savings account model that's offered by traditional lenders. Many of you have heard of the K-C model here with San Francisco, headed up by Jose Cisneros. I will say their private partner on that is Citibank, and it's one of the few programs that actually have a private bank who's supporting it. By far, the greatest number of children's savings accounts use a state's 529 plan as the platform from which you build your children's savings account model. I want to be clear, though, here. A 529 alone is not a children's savings account. It is merely a financial product by which you build the program or the initiative around. So I want to be very clear about that. Regardless of the model, whether you use a for-profit model like San Francisco or whether you use a 529 like the Harold Alfond College Challenge in Maine, either model will provide a match component, right? So many will have a 50 cents to the dollar match or a one-to-one match, et cetera, and they'll usually cap that. For example, in Connecticut at $250. Or they offer other benchmark incentives, again, ties towards reinforcing positive savings behavior and those types of things. Both models will often offer that. So a little bit about why the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston is interested in universal and automatic children's savings accounts. We believe that CSAs have the potential to expand economic and educational opportunities, particularly for low and moderate income families and children. We believe that as states begin to align their workforce development kind of aspirations and tie those to the Illumina Foundation's goal of 2025, that CSA support the interests of the states in that regard. And I will say, by the way, in this presentation, which will be posted to the website, you'll see a number of active hyperlinks here that will drive you to additional information for you to look at after this webinar. So that'll be made available. We also believe, number three, that CSAs represent a long-term investment in our citizenry while helping to support and achieve Vermont's workforce development aspirations, particularly as we move away from the historical industries that have supported the northern tier for so long, and I call those the 3Fs, the farming, the fishing, and the forestry. We eventually moved to heavy manufacturing, and now are making that move to more advanced manufacturing and knowledge-based economies. This is a long-term tool in our toolbox to help to achieve our workforce development aspirations so we can align those to a 21st century economy. Fourth, we believe CSAs help address New England and Vermont's middle skills gap by addressing the secondary education affordability. And what I mean by middle skills, I'm talking about those types of jobs that require some form of academic training, not necessarily a four-year degree, but at the same time, when you think about, every doctor needs a radiologist, you think about tool makers like my father who had some form of higher education and was able to provide a living wage, those are the types of jobs we're talking about. And then lastly, we believe it's important that everybody to have some skin in the game. And this is why when you think about universal and automatic children's savings accounts, it's not just the consumer, i.e. the child and the family. This is not the state supporting it. It's just not just an outside organization. It's in an era of declining resource and the need to work more efficiently and effectively. It's all of these components of our society working in tandem together to advance individual and collective missions. So I was on Illumina Foundation's website. I want to kind of get a sense of the levels of education for Vermont residents between the ages of 25 to 64. A couple of things jumped out at me real quick here doing the math. Of the 336,459 Vermont residents between the age of 25 to 64, 53 of them do not possess a college degree or similar credential. So again, we reflected on the Lumina 2025 goal that on the previous slide that said their goal is to have 60% of its citizenry with some form of secondary education. You'll see right now Vermont is falling short of that, and I'll get to that in a moment. And with 47%, by the way, in the opposite kind of trajectory, have some form of post-secondary education. Now, moving that forward, thinking about this, again, 60% of a citizenry, looking at Vermont, if you were to track forward, you'll see keeping all things same, all things similar, you'd be about 54% of your citizenry in 2025 have some form of secondary education falling short. Now, you may think that, you know, this is, oh, hey, it's only 6%, but we're really talking about thousands of individuals here in the tens of thousands when you think about it. This is not a small number here. This is a relatively large number that would represent somewhat of a heavier lift, if you will. So, with that being said, what I want to do is highlight some of the relevant research. As you know, as the Federal Reserve, particularly our work in low and moderate income communities, our focus is on research and data. That's our core competency. So I started this journey looking at what some of the research had to say. There's a few things I'd like to point out, if I may. And this was actually looked at Michael Sheridan in 2012. That was particularly interesting. CSAs have the potential to greatly impact and improve economic mobility. And this is the part I particularly enjoyed. Asset-based policies for children could also be most direct and effective way to alter class reproduction and diminish intergenerational transmission of poverty. My colleague Ray Bashar in 2011 said, starting early also provides lifetime potential for asset accumulation by allowing the accounts to effortlessly accumulate interest even when beginning with modest initial and annual deposits. When I talk about modest, they're talking about an average amount of $400 and $500 can create aspirations and expectations for their student and for their families that have ripple effects for not only for that family but generations following. There's a high correlation between those individuals who hold assets and to improve academic achievement. The next bullet here, 75% of children with their own savings are enrolled or have graduated from college versus 45% of those without savings. Children's savings are connected with more positive college-bound identities. In 2011 was looked at. Now, I'll preface here. When they talk about creating college-bound identities, you'll hear that a lot in this space. Our position is that we're trying to create success-bound identities, assuming that not everyone necessarily needs a 4-year degree to be successful. Again, going back to this middle skill piece, but an associate's degree can go an awful long way to advancing one's collective mission and their family. So we really talk about creating success-bound identities, being successful in life. For low and moderate income families, children with savings of their own are twice as likely as those to be enrolled in college. Moving forward, just looking at some of the other research, and if you, this is particularly interesting, if you look at the second bullet I found, asset holding may also impact both children and families' expectations and future orientations. Again, this is about creating aspirational thinkers. So folks who can look at their current situation and have a vision of what the future might hold for them. I like this piece by Zahn in 2006 in particular. Furthermore, targeting children may have a multiplier effect by engaging larger families in the asset accumulation process. I bring that up as I earlier made that distinction between children's savings accounts around access and affordability to college and looking at children's development accounts, the ability to affect and impact multiple generations, i.e. parents and the children, because oftentimes as a parent myself, you'll do things for your children, your babies, if you will, that you won't necessarily do for yourself. Research shows that who will own assets are more likely to be future-oriented and have higher expectations for the future. Again, a little bit of a future orientation there. And its potential impact of CSAs. Moving forward, I wanted to kind of give you all a sense of what was going on in this children's savings account space at the national level. And interestingly enough, I have to apologize because at some level this map is no longer accurate. There has been so much activity in this space of late. For example, if you look at New England, all of this should now be orange. As in 5 of 6 New England states, you have some form of a children's savings account being developed in some way. But anyway, you'll see there's a number of state initiatives. 15 states, actually more than that, currently incentivize deposits into their 529 plans. You'll see there's municipal and county initiatives that are taking place, i.e. the K2C model we talked about previously. You'll see a number of private and philanthropic initiatives that are taking root, Grand Rapids and the EARN and the Fuel program in the Commonwealth. And then you'll see Native American initiatives that are going on. This is particularly true for those Native American tribes who do not have access to gaming. And there's a big distinction there. Now, what I want to do is share with you kind of, as you often will know, you can look at the national kind of space here, as I said, and say, well, that's what's going on out here. But as I said previously, in 5 of 6 New England states, CSAs, or Children's Savings Accounts, universal and automatic, are in some form of development, right? And in our own backyard, we have what's considered the most comprehensive program in the United States that had its roots, or it started in 2008 and expanded statewide in 2009 with the Harold Alfond College Challenge. Now, they've undergone some significant changes effective March to commemorate Harold Alfond's birthday. The Harold Alfond College Challenge is part of the Alfond Scholarship Foundation. If you don't know who Harold Alfond was, he was the founder of Dexter Shoes. But look what his chairman said about the foundation and its college challenge in March. We've come to realize that providing the opportunity to receive the grant isn't enough. We need to make sure that all Maine babies actually have the grant. And so what they did, they shifted. They went from an opt-in model, which says I have to sign up for this, to an opt-out model in terms of an automatic enrollment. Because at that time, even in 2008, trying to give away free money, if you will, $500 for every kid, they still only had about 40% of eligible children participate in the program. And we cannot minimize the importance of reducing procedural barriers to entry. And one of the greatest is one that looks at opt-in versus opt-out. Opt-in being when you have to select yourself, and opt-out being automatic. And that's what many of the states are moving towards. So what I shared with you, and this is actually in part of a study that was put together in consultation with the University of Washington School of St. Louis and Margaret Clancy, if you all know her. This looks at how the program has changed over time. And so to kind of give you a sense, so for example, when the babies, and you'll see FAME, this is the Finance Authority of Maine. Okay, so thinking about the Vermont context, think about the Vermont Student Aid Corporation as being a kind of contemporary type of organization. So essentially what would happen once the child was born, what they used to do is they would automatically receive the $500. But you would have to you'd have to opt into that. Now you actually have to opt out of that. And I've taken you through this decision tree for you to look at your leisure later. But the reality is that what they've done, and we will get to here right here, is they've increased their participation rates by 60%. What they've been able to do in the past, if you look at their opt-in model, from 2008 to 2013, they were able to serve about 5,000 children. With their opt-out model, they're at 100% of their children. So that's about 12,500 children born in the state of Maine every year that benefit from their $500 investment by the Harold Alfond College Challenge, which equates to about $6.25 million. But what I want to get to here, and what I want to draw your attention to, which I think is particularly interesting, and I'll go back to some of that other information, is this allocation of College Challenge operational resources. I mentioned earlier, we're operating in an era of declining resource, and we're being expected, particularly in the nonprofit sector, when our community-based organizations, to be a bit more effective and more efficient in the allocation of resources, and to focus on impact as opposed to just simply outcomes and counting chits, if you will. So if you look here, to draw your attention, look at 2008, 2013, look at the amount of money that was just focused on enrollment, or the amount of resource that just went towards enrollment. And they basically plateaued at about 38, 39%. And when you look at if they were to put increasing resource to it, the marginal benefit was nil. Now, with their opt-out strategy, what they've been able to do is look at it. The amount of resources that go to the things that actually make a difference in people's lives. This idea of family savings and educational communication. So when you think about how these programs operate, it's really around enrollment, save, and education in those 3 buckets. They've been able to expand the buckets around family savings and educational communications and lessen the bucket of resource that it requires towards enrollment. Again, focus on impact and outcomes as opposed to just counting chits or just getting folks kind of in the door. Now, what I'd like to share with you a little bit is kind of what's going on around New England, and then we can kind of open it up to questions, and we can do some other things. But real fast, in Maine, you know, as I said, the Harold Alfond Foundation has changed this program now, beginning in March, making Maine, honestly, the first state to make the college savings for newborns universal and automatic. And so we at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston are continuing to work with the Alfond Scholarship Foundation. And currently we're exploring longer-term research options because we're interested in answering this question, which is how do we make or create believers out of non-believers absent long-term longitudinal data? So thinking about this, even with the Harold Alfond College Challenge that started in 2008, the oldest child in their program is only in kindergarten. So what can we do to look at incremental benchmarks along the way that particularly highlight or suggest that the student is moving in a positive direction, as is the family, and the expectations or the outcomes are in line with current expectations. In New Hampshire, in my home state, New Hampshire passed House Bill 1146, which established a legislative study committee to develop a proposal for New Hampshire. By November 1st, we're charged with putting that on the governor's desk. And it's going to be based on projected kindergarten enrollments in 2016 that, as you can see, address the anticipated investment per student, guidelines for account maintenance, application procedures, and administrative costs. In terms of looking at, in terms of what's going on in Rhode Island Higher Education Assistance Authority, under the direction of Rhode Island State Treasurer Gina Raimondo, got a little typo there, is actively pursuing, forgive me, a universal CSA agenda and a set aside funds for a pilot. Their goal is within the next 90 days to ensure that every child born in the state of Rhode Island benefits from a deposit into their CSA accounts. Phase 2 and Phase 3 will be able to build out the programs that will include both matches and benchmark incentives tied towards positive savings behavior. In Connecticut, Governor Malloy introduced House Bill 5048 in February, and it passed CSA legislation on May 19th. Now, their program is a bit different in that they actually had to start with an opt-in strategy as opposed to an opt-out strategy, primarily based upon resource constraints. So in August, Governor Malloy, together with State Treasurer Napier, announced the launch of the Chet Baby Scholars Program, which will help every Connecticut family start saving for college as soon as their children are born. And then most recently, as I mentioned before, there are 5 states currently working together in some shape, form, or fashion to advance the concept of universal child savings accounts. And those include the state of Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And this group has been working for a number of months together, supporting each other's effort. It started as a Northern Tier effort. And these are 3 states working in concert that have mutual interest, and that's Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And it has since grown now to include Rhode Island and Connecticut. This group met together for the very first time, formally, in June, where they invited Jose Cisneros to come and to learn a little bit more about their kindergarten and college program. And at that time, they affirmed 2 questions that they asked of themselves. One is, were they willing and able to work together to advance each other's collective interest? And 2, if so, how could they work as a unit to actualize this process? And so Colleen Quint, President and CEO of the Harold Alfond College Challenge, stepped to the plate and said she'd be willing to go out and actually work in concert with us at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston to provide in-state consulting or kind of seminars around children's savings accounts, working with each state's governor and their individual state treasurer's office. And since then, we've completed these trainings both in Rhode Island and in Connecticut, and today we're scheduled to meet with the Legislative Study Committee at 1 o'clock as they begin to hone their plan in preparation for the November 1st kind of formal rollout, but really in preparation for State Representative Lovejoy's formal kind of presentation at a large convening we're hosting in Laconia, New Hampshire on September 23rd. So that is it for my bit of a formal presentation. My hope and my goal is that we'd have a bit of a kind of give and take here. So I feel free to open up to any questions, and we can kind of go from there. Paul, I'll leave it to you, sir.
Thanks, Anthony. We do have some questions in, and I just want you to clarify a couple of terms. But first, you talked a little bit about class, or you mentioned class reproduction. And we know there's a lot of research now on social mobility, and we hear about class and social reproduction in the United States. And how difficult it is to move from lower income status to middle income, and how people at the higher incomes very rarely move to the middle and lower income. So we're kind of stuck here. Can you talk a little bit about how CSAs may help in terms of social mobility?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody on this line would agree that for what it's worth, education is really the long-term ticket in terms of advancing one's family's interests, right, which is in their own socioeconomic class, and they're really, frankly, their household financial stability. You know, defined in such a way that allows families to stay current on their debt burdens, you know, save and invest for the future, and really meet for current needs. So if you look at all of the data that currently exists out here, particularly around access and affordability, is that our position is really honed in on that. And what I mean by that is this. Currently, there's about $1.3 trillion in debt out there as it relates to student debt, what that can mean for individuals and communities. And so in terms of the pocketbook economics, which is that people, that we believe that children's savings accounts are a means to effectively mitigate this through an asset-based approach. Now, there's also a link, and this is going to be kind of some of a theoretical conversation. There is a direct corollary between debt and graduation rates. The greater the debt one takes on, the lesser the likelihood of graduation. So if we can ameliorate or mitigate debt by advancing the concept of children's savings accounts, by default, we believe that would advance graduation rates. If we advance graduation rates, get people into the workforce, particularly in more knowledge-based economies, they can move from the current position, much like the position I grew up in, into a position now being, you know, a solid middle-class family. And at the end of the day, I think that's what people want to do, right, Paul, which is take care of their families and provide for their needs and save and invest for their future. And I think through, obviously, this access and affordability, access to education, let me be clear, particularly with these 529 accounts and using the savings platforms, you know, the benefit of compound interest in allowing low and moderate income people, frankly, to take advantage of, again, compound interest in the capital markets really would help advance, again, this issue of access and affordability, educational attainment, and then one's better ability to meet for the needs of their family and increasing their overall and broader household financial stability.
And that's great, Anthony. I don't have it with me right now, but we will post it with your presentation on our website so people have access to it. There is a chart out from the Vermont Department of Education, and it's riveting in terms of the correlation between education and poverty. Those without a high school diploma, 40% of those without a high school diploma are living in poverty. When a person gets a diploma, that drops to about 20 to 22%. And those with a college degree, it drops to only 5%. So you can see the really strong connection there between education and poverty. So we'll post that on our website. The other thing I think people might be thinking about is why focus, you know, when we talk about classism in the United States and, you know, access that the upper class, the middle class may already have to certain programs, why would a children's savings account be universal? Why would it focus on all classes and not just be targeted with limited resources to folks at lower incomes?
Well, I mean, broadly, if you look, Treasury in 2009 did a study that looked at the participation rates of middle income and low and moderate income individuals into these things like 529s. And they saw that, first of all, just generally speaking, about 5 to 8%, if I've got the number correct, I'm pretty sure I do, of United States, of folks throughout the United States actually participate in 529 plans. And those skew heavily towards middle and upper income folks. So, Paul, the reality is middle and upper income folks are already participating in their individual states' 529 plans. And frankly, they're participating not in one, some of them are participating in many, right? As an example, let me give you an example of a recent figure I just found out. Was if you look at the state of New Hampshire, we have one of the largest 529 plans, but it's a national plan, and only 4% of New Hampshireites actually participate in our own state's plans. Now, assuming that, again, keeping in line with the Treasury report, that the majority of folks are middle and upper income people, and it's only 4% of our state citizenry, you can actually make the assumption that the participation rates of low and moderate income people is probably nil. So my underlying theme here, point is, Paul, middle and upper income people are already participating in children's savings accounts, or at least at a minimum, 529 plans. All we're suggesting is that we can expand opportunity by reducing the procedural barriers to entry that disallow or prohibit participation from low and moderate income people. So this is not bringing in middle and upper income people. Frankly, sir, they're already there. What we're trying to do is expand opportunity to allow low and moderate income folks to benefit from the same tools that middle and upper income folks can participate in, i.e. compound interest in the capital market. So we're simply trying to level the playing field.
That's great, thank you. We have just a comment from somebody, and I think this speaks to social mobility for sure. Also, we hear a lot about behavioral economics, and this person wants you to talk a little bit more about that aspiration piece, about how we inculcate dreams and hopes in kids and how CSAs kind of creates the space for that to happen.
Well, you talk about creating aspirational thinkers and people who can dream beyond their current circumstance, and I think that's the direction of the question. And the linkage between an asset, and what that means, and what that means for a person's future. And not to get too personal here, but one can only imagine, and thinking of my own personal example, of a product of a single mother with an 8th grade education who reinforced the concept of education for me in a very easy way. And imagine this to be the low-tech version of a children's savings account. And many of you may be listening to me right now could remember this. The envelope. The envelope was a means for my mother to literally save small amounts of money each week from her paychecks. She had two different jobs, that said, you are going to go someplace beyond where I have gone in my life. So that had a profound impact on me, the individual, that said, I can aspire to something beyond what I currently see in my circumstance, and where I grew up. So the same thing holds true here with CSAs. And the thing that I find particularly interesting is if you, and particularly when you think about issues of race and ethnicity and so on, if you were to level set for income, and even thinking about issues of race and ethnicity, you're going to see the same things, that students who have savings and assets are twice as likely not only to graduate, are twice as likely to graduate and move forward. So this allows one to believe that there's a future ahead of them, that there's someone who's back there supporting. You'll find, too, in some of the programs, and this is anecdotal stuff that I've picked up over time, Paul, and interfacing with a number of different programs, but particularly those that build in, and this is really, really critical here, that those that build in financial capabilities or financial education training in the classroom. So you're looking at, like in Nevada as an example, how can you use a children's savings account as a financial literacy training tool when only some people in the classroom have them? You cannot. So now in Nevada, what they've done, they created a space where they can talk about the idea of compound interest in the classroom, recognizing that everyone in that classroom has a children's savings account that's geared towards going towards college. That's very powerful. Not only is it powerful in the moment as a financial literacy tool, you can train through this, learn while doing, but at the same time, it shows that the state and the individual are making an investment in you, the student. And then you can therefore then go and aspire and create your own expectations moving from there. So it's less scientific than it is. The reality is the idea is if you have people who've got your back, you and I both recognize, Paul, and those are out there, that your ability to dream is much greater. And I think that's what the question or the comment was really about.
Thanks,
At least I hope it was.
No, it's great. And we have a few questions related to 529s because I'm not sure if everybody knows exactly what they are or what they do. And one of the comments is, doesn't everyone have the access to the 529? You touched on that. You may want to expand a bit. What are other savings tools? Why don't low-income families use the 529, or why not just use a regular savings account at a bank?
Well, real quick, an average savings account in a bank right now is going to pay you about 0.00003% interest in this low interest rate environment. So the reality is you don't get the full benefit of what possibly could make, right? There's an opportunity cost there. 529s again the 529s are named for the relevant section of the federal tax code. And again, if you on page 2 or slide 2, 529 savings plan is a state-sponsored, tax-preferred savings plan for qualified post-secondary educational expenses. The reality of the situation is that 529 savings plans were not built with low and moderate income people in mind. They're really, and that's okay. This is not that they say that they should, but they just weren't. But the reality is we can expand the opportunities by reducing the procedural barriers to entry. So, yes, can everyone participate in the 529 plan? Sure. But where are your interests? And so if you know it's tax-preferred savings plan, so this is really an opportunity to decrease it's an opportunity to not only advance and support educational opportunities, right, by savings. In a tax-preferred environment, you can reduce your overall tax burden. So, you know, from an interest level, low and moderate income individuals aren't necessarily looking at a tax shelter, frankly. They're just simply looking for shelter. On the other side is that there are many procedural barriers to entry that impede low and moderate income folks' ability to participate. And let me just talk about a few of them. One I highlighted previously, which is the opt-in versus the opt-out. It sounds small, but it's a primary procedural barrier to entry. Minimum savings account, minimum savings amounts was another. So in many states, for example, what they've done now is they've reduced the minimum amount you can save, you know, to $25. Historically, it was $100, $200. And for a low and moderate income individual, as a percentage of their income, that can be a fairly large hit. Number three is complexity. And so if you look in this environment, if anybody's ever signed up for a 529 plan, and if you've gotten the documentation, I encourage you to consult a counselor or a lawyer. It's extremely complex, and if you can imagine the link, as Paul talked about in terms of education and income, and one can assume low and moderate income folks are a little less sophisticated in terms of their financial acumen, that is a pretty scary proposition to look at. Do I do donor-advised funds as opposed to non-donor-advised funds? Do I do an aged index? Do I do a not aged index? There's a number of variables there that really make it difficult. And then fourth is how and where you can save. Do they make it easy for you? So for example, in Harold Alfond College Challenge, not only do they provide you educational updates on a quarterly basis with your quarterly statement, but they also provide you a tear-off coupon that you could then send in to save additional monies on a quarterly basis. So those are some of the, again, procedural barriers to entry that for the middle and upper income individual is really nothing. These are not barriers to entry at all. But for low and moderate income individuals, they represent significant barriers to entry, which is why you see such low participation rates as well.
Anthony, could you just briefly explain individual development accounts? You talked about them. What are they? Who are the target population, and what are their purpose? I know that's not our topic for the day, but it is a form of asset development, as are children's savings accounts. So could you please briefly discuss that?
Sure. Individual development accounts are also called match savings programs. And in a nutshell, if I were to save $1, if you think about my work with the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, we manage the match savings program. We have about 76 different match savings accounts this year we'll be able to manage. And so, for example, in a program, if I were to save $1, I get a match. It can be a 1-to-1 match. Sometimes it's 2-to-1 match. Sometimes it's 3-to-1 match. So for my $1, I get $3, a $3 match. Advancing and multiplying my savings ability. The idea is that that match inherently reinforces positive savings behaviors. That's the idea behind that. Now, when I talked a little bit about scale, what you'll find, and this is somewhat related to sources and uses of capital, IDAs are primarily used for three specific purposes. Number one, for the purchase of a first-time home. And you'll find that traditionally, that's where a lot of IDA programs kind of rest. I participate with NeighborWorks Southern New Hampshire, and we have a number of people participating in our match savings programs in preparation for the purchase of their first-time home. Number two, you can use as assets to seed a small business. And that's, frankly, is probably a second position of the amount that it's used. And I think that holds true in Vermont. And then thirdly, they're used to fund education. And so those are the primary uses. Now, again, with Children's Savings Account, it has one principal use and only use. It's to fund education. And then the other kind of about IDAs is they have primarily is one federal source of capital, and that's what they call AFI money. Now, that is income-based. So as I referenced my experience in New Hampshire, one can participate in a match savings program as a family of 4 if you make less than $47,100. So again, they're income-based programs where, and again, the differentiation between children's savings accounts is they're not income-based. Anybody, whether you make $1 or you make $1 million, can participate in a children's savings account program, assuming, of course, they have the means to do so. So those are the primary, and that's IDAs 101, if you will, the nuts and bolts, Paul.
That's great, thank you. So, as you know, our office has been looking at a variety of asset development programs, and we do have the IDA program. We're looking at these because of the potential for long-term solutions to poverty by having people learn about finances and also beginning to create assets. One of the things that we run into and we talk about when we talk about asset development for very low-income people is for those folks who are on public benefits, many of them have asset limits for their benefits. And this can be a big issue, a big challenge for really low-income families. Have you run into this conversation in other states where asset saving or children's savings accounts are bumping up against this asset limit for people on public benefits? Has that been a conversation?
It's definitely been part of the conversation, and it's a real issue, Paul. So with that being said, now these accounts, and when we talk about universal and automatic, are held on the behalf of the individual student. They're held by a private organization. So, those accounts, for example, all the accounts in San Francisco are in the city of San Francisco's name, and there's a ledger account that goes underneath that. So they have the technical term would be one ginormous account, if you will, under the name of the city of San Francisco. And then you have basically a ledger account for the individual participant. This was done specifically to not to have folks bump up against its asset limitations. So then they're cut off of public assistance, access to child care support, and various other, human service delivery or social support initiatives. So that's a great question, Paul, and I appreciate you bringing it up because it is part of the discussion. And that's what you'll find. These assets are held by the organization, and for example, in the assets, they're held by in states, for example, Merrill Lynch, which is who manages the 529 account. That's who actually holds the accounts in the name of the individual student. So they don't actually hold the asset, and therefore they don't have to bump up against the asset limitation, and they're not dissuaded from saving and actually building an asset, which oftentimes can happen when folks try to save and advance their own kind of lives.
That's great. So these are custodian accounts. They do not affect temporary aid for needy families, Reach Up in our state, or 3 Squares Vermont, which is also known as food stamps across the country. So that's really, really good to know. I know this initiative, it's fairly young, children's savings accounts. We see a lot of solutions out there, or proposed solutions to ending long-term poverty, and some of them include expanding the earned income tax credit, expanding the child care tax credit. Where do you think, with limited resources, we don't as a state have the ability necessarily to fund all these different initiatives? Why do you think children's savings accounts should be put into that pot as a potential long-term solution when we have these other potential solutions as well? Where does it stack up, if you know, against these other potential solutions?
I mean, Paul, that's a difficult question to answer in fact, because they are so new. And, frankly, the data is still coming in terms of what is the overall impact associated with this. And so, I would caution those here and others. This is not the cure or the panacea, but it's really intended to be a tool in the toolbox in terms of, this broader idea around asset development. I mean, for long, I think that what we see now is that the data will support and suggest that these have a positive impact on enrollment and educational attainment. But again, if you think about it, the oldest student is only in kindergarten right now. We still got to wait and see. There's still a long road to hoe. So I kind of put this in this broader kind of contextual conversation, which is, yes, this is a tool. We can expand opportunity by expanding participation. We can encourage everybody to participate into it, and this is merely one tool in the toolbox for middle income and lower income folks to advance educational opportunity to support their families. So, I'd love to be able to give you a definitive answer, Paul, but I don't think that, if I were to be intellectually honest, I can do that. But I think currently right now the data suggests that there's opportunity here, and I think aligning one's resources is, as you know, budgets are a reflection of one's values, both personally and within municipal and state budgets. And so if we can look at what's currently available in terms of opportunity, is there some resource out there that could be shifted? This is a relatively low lift, too. We're talking about, maybe $50 per student in some states, $100 per student. I think, how many children are born in the state of Vermont right now, Paul? We've got about 12,000 in New Hampshire, relatively small numbers. But the reality is, what you're saying is that this is a tool that attracts participation regardless of your political affiliation, and it attracts interest from the private sector. And what you're seeing is that philanthropic organizations, businesses, frankly, are incorporating even CSAs as part of their broader benefits package, right? So employees can make direct deposits into their state's 529 plans. And the individuals are really looking at this and saying, I can't advance my own personal opportunity through this match savings component and these benchmark incentives. So this is, again, when you think about why the Federal Reserve is interested, because everybody's got skin in the game. So you'll find people are very interested in this because they can understand it. It makes sense. It's a relatively low lift, and it gets people participating in a way that they haven't necessarily participated before.
So, Anthony, how do we pay for it? How much will it cost? You talked about Maine. I believe that was a private foundation. How much is each child getting? What are some of the other states talking about in terms of funding?
All right. In terms of total cost, so when you think about how children's savings accounts are structured, think about the uses of capital. I would say there's 4. So you've got the initial seed deposits, you've got the match, you've got the benchmark incentives, and then you have the cost of doing business or administration. So those are your principal 4 cost centers, if you will. Excuse me. Now the sources of capital, the sources of funds varies by program, and it varies dramatically. So you mentioned Maine's program. Maine right now is working. It started with 1 foundation. Now there are 3 who are working in this effort. I think Maine Community Foundation is actually supporting one of their newer models that's actually looking at the poorest county, Washington County, in Maine, and focus on Head Start sites, right, as part of their broader model to ensure participation of low and moderate income people. So it's going to vary. And also, now they've built in this. Now they've got the 10 largest businesses in Maine participating in this. Some of them are actually supporting and providing seed deposits for their employees. Others are providing their CSA automatic deposits as part of their broader benefits package. And then you have some states allocating general funds. And so, for example, I referenced Connecticut previously. They've allocated $4.4 million to the effort, and that ensures that every child born in the state of Connecticut merely gets $100. And they, and that will extend out over time. Of course, they've done that, and they're securing additional sources of capital. So, Paul, the answer is those are the 4 cost centers. It's going to vary by state, obviously. Number 2 is that the sources of funds will vary by state. And then 3, what you're saying is that this is attracting both public and private capital in ways that other ways haven't. So I don't know if that's a good answer to your question, but I gave it a shot. But that's,
I think it helps us to start to scale it. I think in Maine, the seed money for each newborn was $500. We have 6,000 kids born every year. If we wanted to seed that through public-private funding at $200 or $300. I think the point is that even that amount begins the conversation, the hope, the dreams, the aspirations. Hey, we've got an account for you that you can access when you're older, and then we have this thing that it's already set up that we can contribute it to. And I think what you're saying is that even that initial seed money, even if it's small, is very, very powerful. And then we've got the work to do to figure out just how to get that to, you know, the number of kids that are being born each year in this state. We do have another question. Somebody wants you to address family engagement more, the importance of engaging families in saving, not just having an account open. That is which is a real challenge for universal automatic accounts.
That's true, and there's actually a quote in here. If you look on it, and you'll see it when you have a chance to look at it, I include that on slide 7, and I think it speaks to this. And I'm going to read it. It says, nevertheless, the holding of savings alone may not be enough to affect future orientation. Finding support that having savings is more effective when children also expect to graduate from college. Willie Elliott III, Dr. Willie Elliott III goes on to say, thus CSAs may need to be implemented in conjunction with financial education programs in college preparation to influence the use of the funds accumulated. So I think, you know, just having the account simply is not enough, sir. It's a start, and it begins the conversation within the family. But what you're seeing is that those programs who have understood the balance between touch, which is oftentimes we have to do a trade-off, right? Higher the touch, less the scale. Higher the scale, less the touch. Those programs that have been able to find that good middle ground, which is that ensuring that you have an authentic contributor to that family's success in front of them. And what you're seeing, many of the Head Start programs, that's their individual case managers, that's a community action program that they're working with. There's a number of different folks. Having them in front of you, really working with the family, providing the financial education or financial capabilities training in conjunction with the 529, is that's where you're seeing the greatest levels of success. So I cannot underscore enough the importance of the front-facing organization and having them perceived by the end user as an authentic contributor to their success, and as sometimes walking with this family. And those are where you're going to see that's what's really, really important, because it's not just about the actual product, and I mentioned that before. It's about building the system or the initiative around said product that really allows the individual, the family, and the program to really flourish.
We have another question. Do you happen to know anything about child support, CSAs in Kansas? Could you speak about that as a partnership?
You know, I know very little about it, Paul, but I guess I've heard about it, and that is a means that folks have been using this to take the child support money that's been out there and be able to reallocate that to fund the individual's CSA. Those programs are out there. How they actually operationalize it, sir, that's beyond me. That's beyond me. But I will say, if you have an interest in the work in Kansas, I would encourage that individual to reach out to Dr. William Elliott III. He's at Kansas State University. He leads their asset development initiative. I'm getting the name wrong, but I can pull that up for you in a moment. And he'd be a great resource for that program out in Kansas. Absolutely.
If you can send us that contact information, we'll post it on the website. We have another question. Does any state have a checkoff on their tax returns that allows them to donate to a statewide CSA program? Good question.
Yes. Actually, that's part of Connecticut's plan. Absolutely. So, like, it's just like, you know, donate $3 to the presidential campaign fund, that type of thing. Absolutely. You can check that box, and a portion or all of your refund can go directly to your children's savings accounts.
That's great. That's great. Well, Anthony, as you know, our office is very interested in this topic, and our only interest is in really promoting this conversation statewide to see where we can go. Again, we're looking at this as one of the many potential tools to help end poverty. So we really want to thank you for highlighting this issue, because it is fairly new, and I think folks who were on the webinar today got a really good introduction. I want folks, if they want to continue this conversation and they have more interest, to please email me and to hopefully join us at our learning session. That will be on October 27th from 9 to noon. If you email me, I will get you the agenda and the location once we have that, which will be in the next week or so. And you can reach me at paul.dragon@state.vt.us. Anthony, any closing comments or thoughts from you?
No, sir. I guess one of the interesting things is I'll be up your way on September 11th, meeting with the New England Board of Higher Education, who's expressed interest in supporting this effort across New England. So, there's another example of not the usual actor really interested and engaged in this opportunity and willing to support our work not only in Vermont and in New Hampshire, but across New England. So I'm very pleased.
Well, we are delighted and really excited to be working with you, and just really hopeful about this project. So thank you so much for a great presentation, and thank you everybody for joining us on the webinar. And we will talk to you next month, October 30th at noon, where we will be talking about women in poverty issues. So please join us then. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Anthony.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.